redefining of the term conspiracy theory. So before we begin that, I want to say that when language itself is being twisted and distorted, that's a clear sign of deception and manipulation. And this gets really ridiculous what they've done here. It's baffling almost. It's so obvious that it's hard to see, kind of thing. You have to kind of squint your eyes at their narrative and say, well, wait, words have meaning, right? So if we look at, a conspiracy as a secretive plot by two or more people that does harm, so it's harmful, it's the first definition. Theory, figuring out, something undecided, nebulous. We suspend judgment for a theory. That's the two basic words that we're putting together, and we're getting, like we have here, a neutral idea of conspiracy theory. Merriam-Webster defines it as a theory that explains an event or set of circumstances as the result of a secret plot by usually powerful conspirators. There's nothing here about whether or not that theory is probable or improbable, whether it's overall accepted or rejected by the populace, whether, what level of empirical support there is for this theory. None of that is in the definition. Those are all spectrums that we can kind of roughly plot as we did earlier in the introduction. They're all spectrums. This is a spectrum-based neutral idea, very, very broad. So what we're going to see, though, is they are going to pinpoint this idea very specifically and very negatively. So let's take a look here at this again. Again, this is the spectrum-based definition, the ultimate types of conspiracy theories, when we find out ultimately they were completely true or ultimately completely false or partially true, which is probably usually the case. But all these other spectrums that we have to consider with the definition. But instead, what we're getting in the mainstream narrative is this idea that here, let's look at Wikipedia's definition. Conspiracy theory is an explanation for an event or situation that invokes a conspiracy by sinister and powerful groups. And let me see here. Often political in motivation. Here's the key: when other explanations are more probable. So here they define a conspiracy theory as improbable or less probable. It's on a negative side of the spectrum. All right, so keep that in mind. They also correctly state that the term has a negative connotation, implying that the appeal to a conspiracy is based on prejudice or insufficient evidence. Okay, so yes, that's definitely true and kind of enlightening. Let's look at the News Literacy Project's definition of conspiracy theory. This is great, guys. Check this out. An unfounded explanation of an event or situation, unfounded, that blames the secretive work of sinister, powerful people such as government, a company, or even one person. Unfounded, okay? Not well-founded, but unfounded. Again, in the same segment, they have a researcher here. Her name is Renee DiResta, saying that conspiracy theories are speaking in absolutes based on faulty logic, false evidence, or no evidence. They make sure that you see that there, and this is their narrative, right? The mainstream narrative. Conspiracy theories. No evidence. No evidence. All conspiracy theories, by the way, I think are based on some element of truth. Otherwise, they simply couldn't take hold. They couldn't take root. Even if they're completely baseless, fake, there has to be some element of truth in there, I think, for them to take hold. But no evidence, no factual basis whatsoever false evidence, no evidence. So that's their narrative. And what is she? The Stanford Internet Observatory Technical Research Manager. Okay. That's great. That's, that's what you get when big money comes together to frame this narrative. Let's look at the News Literacy Project for a minute. Their supporters include Apple, over $1 million. Apple, who was instrumental in helping to crush Parler when somebody was trying to step up and be, the First Amendment supporting town square that we so sorely need. So this was just in the last 12 months. If you go to their website, you'll see this. To get more of a thorough look, you got to go back and get their annual reports, and you can find out that, for instance, in 2020, they had a bunch of big money come in anonymously. We don't know how much, at least $1 million coming in from an anonymous source here, and another anonymous source donating somewhere between $500,000 to $999,000. So big money there coming in. Again, here we've got an anonymous donation from Silicon Valley Community Foundation. So I don't know how it's anonymous and from them at the same time, but that's what they list here. And News Corp donating up to $100,000. So again, big media partners like News Corp, but we also have the who's who of mainstream media here: ABC, CNN, CBS, Reuters, Vice, USA Today, Wall Street Journal, WAPO, NPR, . So that's what we're seeing from that source. Really, that source was really, their definition was very, very skewed, extremely skewed in the negative. Here's another example. Let's look at this. Cindy Otis, writing for Vogue, Teen Vogue. I found her through some other source. I don't read Teen Vogue, but she's ex-CIA. And she says that a conspiracy theory, and this is a very neutral definition, a conspiracy theory is a belief that a covert effort, like a secret plan or an influential group, is responsible for a particular event or circumstance, rejecting established or accepted narratives. I don't think it has anything to do with whether or not the mainstream narrative is accepted or rejected. She threw that in. But other than that, I think it's fairly neutral. But here she, speaking in absolutes, says in the first line of another section of the same article, conspiracy theories are fictional stories that cherry-pick evidence. And she puts evidence in scare quotes there. So immediately she goes to, not immediately, but shortly after, she goes to defining conspiracy theories as fictional and not even having evidence. It's quote-unquote evidence that's cherry-picked, right? Later on, she says, conspiracy theories use narratives that are meant to sound scary and stoke fear. So even when we get like a neutral definition, they pile other negative meaning on top of that. We'll see that again here in this. This is a popular interview that it's quoted elsewhere, and this psychologist is also writes a lot of articles about conspiracy theories that make their way around the mainstream. Karen Douglas, here in this interview, defines conspiracy theory as what can nominally be defined as a proposed plot carried out in secret, usually by a powerful group of people who have some kind of sinister goal. So something to gain from what they're doing, and they usually don't have people's best interests at heart, usually their own interests at heart. Fair enough. Pretty neutral, but then later on she states that how do you address, or she's speculating, how do you address misinformation? How do you address conspiracy theories? So in that context, kind of associating directly conspiracy theories with misinformation, thinking about them along the same lines at least. And again, She states, so others have taken this information and have started to look at ways to inoculate people against misinformation and to inoculate people against conspiracy theories and fake news and all sorts of other things. Again, here lumping together the ideas of conspiracy theories, misinformation, fake news, and things that they need to inoculate against. So they're fighting against these. Conspiracy theories are defined as something that you want to resist. Here is what she says now. Help people resist conspiracy theories or fight against or something essentially bad. So the article itself, the context, you have to read into the context here and kind of find it, but it goes against that neutral definition that you get from the outset. That neutral definition, which is anchored like in the dictionary definition that we read earlier, but it's also anchored in all of the real conspiracies and all of the legal conspiracies, all of the criminality that we see every day in the world. That anchors the definition of conspiracy theory in a way. So keep that in mind, because it's going to lead to some problems. The problems I'm going to describe as the lexical gap and the negative branding. We'll get to that here in a bit. But let's look at a few other examples here. The Current. This is a Google-produced propaganda rag. It's exclusively like an arm of Google that's pushing this out. It's kind of a fancy little webzine that they got here, all animated and stuff. I know I'm thinking of a different one. Anyway, this one kind of checks all the boxes of the narrative, as we'll see as this talk goes on, but they kind of check all the boxes here. Here they talk about conspiracy theories have legitimized violence, making that association right away. Impaired public health, undermined democratic governance, and then they talk about the theorist. So they get into the identification idea of this right away too. So we'll get into that later, but here they define conspiracy theories as stories that explain the ultimate causes of significant social and political events by means of secret plots between two or more powerful actors. Fair enough. But then they go on to say, well, actual conspiracies do and have occurred. Conspiracy theories lack any empirical support. What? No. They were doing good with the neutral definition, and then they screwed it up right away. Of course, conspiracy theories can have empirical support. Of course they can. They don't. And this contrast between actual conspiracies and conspiracy theories is something we're going to see again. It's really surprising. But to give you a little bit more perspective about Jigsaw in this article, look at this. It says that they're talking about conspiracy theory creation. There's a new generation of influencers, blah, blah, blah. To give a hint of the scale and discourse afforded by the internet, a study led by the Rand Corporation with support from Jigsaw examined da-da-da-da-da. So they're partnering with Rand to study conspiracy theories. Well, who's Rand? Well, it's basically the U.S. government. It's a U.S. government body. You know, a majority of their funding comes from the U.S. government. Look at this. This is from their how we're funded on their website, revenue, $346 million, 250 of which comes from the U.S. government, not including the $6.6 million coming from the state and local government agencies. But the rest of the funding comes from universities, NGOs, foundations, a lot of big money that's kind of funneled through those avenues. Okay, so let's move on here. So this is kind of a bizarre and really transparent way that they're framing conspiracy theories and their narrative. And look at this. You see this more often than you might think. Reflecting on Conspiracy Theories is the name of this article coming out from MSNBC. The first line of this says, sometimes there are actual conspiracies. Really? There are? Okay, and look at this from the Conspiracy Theory Handbook. First line the first line in this handbook says real conspiracies do exist. Really, they do. I didn't know that. So it's like, no shit, Sherlock, right? But take a step back and think of why that's such a zinger to start out something with. Because they've been so busy stigmatizing and pushing down conspiracy theories and making them ridiculous and lunatic fringe, and yeah, there's some crazy conspiracy theories, but there's some very, evidence-based conspiracy theories as well. So they've been so busy keeping the lid on that it does seem like a wow kind of way to start out an article, when really it's like, no shit. Look at that contrast. Real conspiracies do exist. But in a way, they don't. But let's look at this narrative, and I'll tell you what I mean. So this conspiracy theory handbook, by the way, this Stefan Lewandowski, John Cook, this is the inspiration behind the EU's, the European Union's push against conspiracy theories. They kind of put out a bunch of flyers, this whole campaign that the EU is engaged in. They quote, they credit these guys in this handbook in the propaganda that they put out. So very much, the governments are very invested in this kind of narrative, and as well as the media and the oligarchy, the plutocracy, such and so forth, such is the way that our world is run. But real conspiracies do exist. However, conspiracy theories tend to persist for a long time, even when there is no decisive evidence for them. Those conspiracy theories, they write, are based on a variety of thinking patterns that are known to be unreliable tools for tracking reality. Typically, conspiracy theories are not supported by evidence that withstands scrutiny, but this doesn't stop them from blossoming. Okay, so there's a little bit of language there, like typically, so they're not completely talking in absolutes, but the idea that they push here is that real conspiracies are on one hand and conspiracy theories are on the other, when in fact the distinction is between real conspiracies and fake conspiracies, or unreal conspiracy, true ones and untrue ones. So the idea, though, that there's real conspiracies is kind of a misnomer in a way. It's kind of an ephemeral thing, conspiracy theories, because once they become quote unquote real, you lose the secrecy, so it's no longer a conspiracy. And if it's gone from plot, which a conspiracy is like a plot or a scheme, a plan, to actuality, then it becomes what it is, the criminal act, the act of wrongdoing. That's what we call it. We don't typically say, oh, they're in jail for conspiring to rob a bank. We say they're in jail for robbing a bank, even though there was a conspiracy at one point, right? So this idea of real conspiracies is kind of a misnomer. The only thing you can do about current conspiracies, the only thing you can do is theorize about them. That's really all you can do. But here, by contrasting, conspiracy theories being unreliable, they say, based on a variety of thinking patterns that are known to be unreliable tools for tracking reality. By putting it in that box and contrasting it with real conspiracies, you see the distortion here. You see the illogical way that they're handling this. It's really this one in particular is kind of a mind fuck. But again, keep in mind that conspiracy theories are neutrally defined as an event or set of circumstances as the result of a secret plot by usually powerful conspirators. Cambridge, also neutral definition. So what I've broached here is the idea of the lexical gap. So if conspiracy theories are always based on unreliable tools for assessing reality, they're dangerous, They're connected to violence and extremism and terrorism and all this other bad shit. How do we talk? Well, what phrase do we use to talk about something that is legitimately a theory about a conspiracy, right? What do we use? What do we use? They've taken the words over. So there isn't a popular phrase like, no, it's not a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy hypothesis. And, in scientific terms, it really is closer to, it is much more of a hypothesis than a theory. But that's another matter. Anyway, they take the words out of our mouths. So we have this lexical gap, which means there's no way to describe a conspiracy theory that is well evidenced, well founded, logical, consistent, all of the good things that we know it can be. We don't have a way to describe it. Okay? And let me go back here and look. All right, check this out. So even if you come up with some other phrase to define a probable logical conspiracy theory, even if you come up with that phrase, you're still going to get the logical idea of a theory about a conspiracy that's going to stick to what it is you've come up with, the legitimate conspiracy theory, right? The idea of a theory and a conspiracy, how logical and simple it is to apply those words, their combined meaning, and apply it to a certain idea, a phrase, then yeah, it's going to stick. So what you get here is the idea of negative branding. Even if you say, no, it's not a conspiracy theory, it's well-founded, it's well-evidenced theory. Well, technically, it is a conspiracy theory, and somebody could say that, and no matter what, that's going to stick, along with to some degree, that negativity is still going to stick. By definition, it's always going to be a conspiracy theory. So that neutral definition sticks to everything that is a conspiracy theory, and by virtue of that, all that negativity is sticking to even things that are legitimate pursuits of truth and justice. Okay, so keep that in mind. These are very important concepts. The lexical gap and negative branding. I have a history in teaching language. I've been teaching language for about 5 years, and it's incredibly frustrating to me that the language has been essentially corrupted in service of this agenda. Basically, this conspirator-enabling propaganda, as I've called it. So this can be cleared up very simply, too, with language. Fucking adjectives, people. Adjectives. If you want to talk about a crazy conspiracy theory, go ahead. Call it a crazy. Talk about crazy conspiracy theories, do this. And, incoherent conspiracy theories. Damn, I hate those incoherent ones or those illogical ones. Sure, that's fine. Use the adjective. Don't say conspiracy theories ipso facto, speaking in absolutes. Fucking use adjectives. That's what the language is for. So we get to the absurdity of this issue, the absurdity of this narrative, this narrow narrative, as I call it, the narrow narrative. This idea that conspiracy theory equals bad. It's absurd. What's language for anyway if we can't, use the words and phrases that we need to talk about to communicate, especially something so important as conspiracies, because historical atrocities have all been preceded by conspiracies. It's pretty stark, and I mean, I can't stress this enough. This is absurd, this narrative. So anyway, we've got well-evidenced, poorly evidenced. We've got rational, irrational, reasonable, crazy, unfounded, well-founded. There's so many different ways to describe conspiracy theories. And let's take a look at the next section now. All right, so let me pause